Mauvavi.
So welcome back. Next up we have our panel, which is The Way Forward. With us today is Kathy Elson, CEO of Smart MLS since 2017, whose job it is to empower real estate professionals with information, business intelligence, and a more integrated MLS experience. Also with us is Lantz, 2024, President of CT Realtors and an award-winning real estate agent in West Hartford. And also with us today is buchas Lavoie, who's a member of ECAR, one of our own, and also one of our pre-licensing and continued ed instructors. She has worked under Adora Carroll as an agent and now as an instructor for Dynamic Directions. She regularly teaches ABR, PSA, and other NAR courses and is a member of our ECAR Forums Committee. So let's give them a round of applause. So let's start with Kathy. Kathy, what changes has Smart MLS implemented to make the transition easier for agents to comply with the new rules?
So we started about probably a month or so before the August 16th deadline, officially August 17th, which was a Saturday, so I'm not sure anybody ever looked on the calendar. But we implemented all of our changes on the 16th. We put information in the MLS right where those fields were, right? So those infamous fields that we can't speak about on the MLS, but we can speak about anywhere else. In that section, we put, here's the information, like why are these fields missing, and then links to articles as to, why they're missing and where you can get more information about it. We did that on the listing input side and on the report side, which seems to have a significant impact, because it's been pretty quiet since, so we haven't gotten the question, where do they go? Hopefully that made the transition a bit smoother, and then you guys had all the work to do on the other side on how to actually facilitate a transaction without that information.
Great. And can you also please explain what the value of MLS is above and beyond the expectation of having an offer of compensation on there since that has been removed?
So we have gotten that question a couple times that, without compensation, what is the MLS? I just ask you guys to think about for just a second what would happen if the MLS went away tomorrow and what it would take for you to do your job, right? That having one place to get all the information on all the listed properties is a pretty important piece, right? So having 30 years of historical data on the system, nowhere else will you find all the photos that are there before. How many people look at, you see the new listing, the next thing you do is go to the listing history to see what is there, and then you click on the photos, right? So all that information is there. And then there's all the ancillary services that we provide. Scheduling showings without having a centralized showing service would be a lot more labor intensive, right? So you're finding out now what it is just to find out, to make your calls on what you're talking about, because compensation went away. Try making, information about showings and all of that without a centralized service, and the other host of services. Plus, there's a love-hate relationship with our compliance department, right? Everybody loves to have clean and accurate data. Everybody hates it when we reach out to them, right? But without someone being the police force and having clean data, you just have chaos out there in the marketplace. So we think that we have a lot to offer without compensation in the MLS.
Awesome, thank you. And this question's for Carl. So if we can't offer compensation on MLS, where can we communicate if there is a buyer broker compensation?
I was going to say almost anywhere else. The things that you can't do are MLS related, which would be putting it on the code on the lockbox or putting it in showing time. I'm sure you've probably all seen it in showing time. I was just asking Kathy when they were going to remove the little note at the bottom of showing time saying you cannot put commission information at the bottom in showing time. But I have seen some pretty creative ways in the last couple of weeks. I have seen people putting it on a key ring on the key inside the lockbox, which is okay. I have seen people putting it on sign riders. Our office has done it on our website, so when we put it in the back end, when you get a listing, we put it into the back office software, it automatically uploads that. So if you have that, you can share that with other agents and say, hey, it's right on my website. And my favorite one is calling people. You can just call and ask. You know, that's old school, and you can just call up agents and say, hey, are you offering something on this? And if so, how much? And I gotta let my buyers know.
Awesome. And as when you're working with buyers, are you obligated to provide a copy of your buyer's agreement to the listing agent for a showing?
You are not. You are not obligated. That is between you and your buyer, just like they are not obligated to provide their listing agreement to you. It's best to keep those contracts between the people who are involved with them, but it's also very important for us to explain to both parties what those contracts are for.
And so what is required in your buyer agreement about your buyer compensation?
You must have a specific term of the offer of compensation that you are going to receive. So if you sign on a new buyer, you cannot put in up to, you cannot put in a this much, up to this much. It has to either be a dollar amount, an hourly fee, a specific percentage that you're going to charge them, and then explain to them how you're going to attempt to get it from everywhere else first, and that they'll be obligated only if you can't get it from somewhere else.
Awesome, thank you. Next question for Kathy. Given that NAR has tasked MLSs to police the buyer agency, has Smart MLS put in any systems in place to monitor the requirement for buyer representation?
So NAR came up with a settlement for all 50 states, right? Not all 50 states had buyer broker agreement as a law, right? So it's state law here in Connecticut. So the MLS will do what it normally does. If there's an inquiry, we'll reach out and do some, more investigation and some research. We've got another couple ideas for it, but right now it's a state thing here in Connecticut, and everybody should have been and should continue to follow the state law.
Great, and so next question for Carl. What is required or not required to disclose at an open house?
So open houses, I think we're starting to see a few more of those these days, which is a good thing. At an open house, you are required to tell any prospective buyer that you represent the seller. That's your biggest responsibility to them, is to say, I'm not your agent yet. I could be, but I'm not yet. So don't walk in here and say, I won the lotto, I'll give you whatever they want. Beyond that, the easiest way that most people do it is you put up a sign that says, I'm a representative of the seller. If you have questions about agency, please ask. With that, you can bring the forms as far as a buyer agent form, an open agreement form for a buyer's agency. You could bring the prospective parties form, which is what you would have to bring if you were showing your own listing that was not at an open house. And those forms can help you to explain agency to potential buyers that might show up at an open house.
And then follow up on that, can you go a little more detail? What is an open agreement form?
Well, that's one of the things that I don't think we see it very often in Connecticut, but buyers have the option to go into an agreement where they can have me show them one house and Molly show them another house, where it's an open agreement, and you would have to basically say, I'm becoming the procuring cause on a specific property, rather than setting out terms for a time period of a month and any house that might pop up. Those are showing up more. More people are wanting that, and I think that's even more so in other states where, again, buyer agency isn't a law, so they're trying to find ways where people can go back to a closer form of business that they had done in the past.
Great. Next question for Amy. So now with the settlement changes in place, how are buyer brokers getting paid?
We have several options available for us. They are all described on Realtor, and we dive into them in a lot greater detail in the ABR course. The first option is you negotiate a fee with your buyer, insert it into your agreement, and you get paid at the settlement. If the buyer doesn't have the funds for that, we can still negotiate our fee, insert it into the buyer representation agreement, and then our buyer, as a term of their offer, can ask the seller to pay that. That does not violate code or state law. The National Association of Realtors settlement does not preclude us from doing broker-to-broker compensation. So the listing agent is still able to offer compensation to a buyer broker. Buyer broker is going to have to call the listing agent to ascertain if there's any compensation available prior to showing, probably get a broker's agreement signed, and then it's business as usual.
Great, thank you. And Amy, you've been very involved with ECAR, the forums committee, helping us with panels. How else has ECAR prepared its members to navigate the compensation options that you just identified?
We have fully revised and offered to the membership the buyer broker agreement and the purchase and sale agreement, so they're in compliance with the settlement. We are looking on revising, working on revising the listing agreement at this time.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Currently, our listing agreement, we negotiate the whole pie and then we offer out a portion of that pie to a buyer rep. In the new agreement, we're working out almost like an a la carte menu. We'll negotiate our fee as a listing agent first, and then we'll add potentially, if the seller agrees, a fee for representing an unrepresented, or if we're going to act in the capacity of a dual agent. So the seller gets to see the transparency of the fees.
And this question is for really anyone. Do you think that the changes will result in a lower income for real estate agents overall?
I personally do not. I think we all have the skill set, or we're working toward the skill set, or we have a goal to obtain the skill set to negotiate our fee. I don't see us losing money. Anybody else?
I think right after the settlement took effect, or right after the settlement was announced, I did a video for CTR, I don't know if any of you saw it, but I said, buyers and sellers need us. And that's what we need to get back to, is just showing our value. You need to show people what you do for them, because very seldom do you get to the closing table and people say, yeah, they did nothing. They know all the little hurdles you hit, all the little potholes you helped them avoid, all of the work that you did throughout the process of helping them to buy or sell a home. And I think if you illustrate that value, then the income is well warranted. And you don't, I don't think I would ever have a buyer who'd have a problem paying me if they, once they realized all the things that I had done for them throughout the process.
Not a practitioner, by the way. I just think there's so many variables. It's a very general question, right? So I think market dictates. Hopefully interest rates go lower and inventory increases. So there's a lot bigger pool of transactions out there. So everybody put your wishful, was it today they were doing rates, or is it tomorrow? Tomorrow. So hopefully there's an interest rate cut tomorrow and we get more inventory on the market.
So say there's a property that is not offering compensation to buyer brokers, do you think it serves a buyer to not show them that property?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's steering. That steering is when we direct buyers away from properties based on the lack of compensation or the fact that the compensation is not enough to neutralize the buyer agreement. It is a major complaint in the buy-side lawsuit that we are still facing against National Association of Realtors and several major brokerages. So to avoid that, determine what your client wants, show them everything that suits their needs, demonstrate your value, and get paid.
Yeah, I would just say, be very careful out there, right? Show them everything, right? Because you never know. There's price reductions all the time, that happen. That's been common in the marketplace. So just ask for things when in your offers, put everything in writing. The biggest issue we're seeing is people not memorialize things in writing. I haven't seen a major issue come up, but it's not going to be too far on the horizon where it's going to be a he said, she said, and there is nothing in writing. So do yourself a favor, put everything in the agreement. And there are people out there that are keeping eyes on anything and everything that looks like steering We've had emails that have gone, that we've been copied on, that have gone to plaintiffs' attorneys, to national media. There are definitely people out there that want to see people fail, so make sure you don't. Make sure you're at the direction of your buyer, and you're in constant communication with them, and again, have everything in writing.
We were talking just before the program began, and I was saying, I'm showing a condo on Friday, I practice real estate just like all of you guys, and I messaged the agent, and I said, hey, can my buyer, who's an investor, rent this unit? And then I said, are you offering compensation, and if so, how much? Just wanted to check in before I booked a show. And he said, we have 9 showings booked, and you're the first person who's asked. So that's the important thing, is, if you know your buyer has the wherewithal and wants to see it, you don't have to ask, but you just have to know before you put together an offer if there's something being offered out, so that you don't get caught at the end saying, hey, sorry I didn't tell you, but you have to pay me what we talked about at the beginning because I didn't ask the agent. And I think that's the important thing. Again, it goes back to communication, and remember who you work for. If you're a buyer's agent, you work for that buyer, you're trying to get them the best deal you can, and you're trying to get that fee covered by a seller if it's being offered, or at least try and negotiate it in.
So is there ever a time when the buyer's fee will not show up on the closing disclosure?
As far as our residential transactions where there is financing involved, more than likely not. That money is part of the monies that the buyer's bringing to the table. It may impact the ratios. It will have to show up on the closing disclosure. The only place I can see it not showing up on a closing disclosure or not being part of the disclosure, the end of the discussion would be if it was a cash or commercial. However, a lender or an attorney would probably be better able to speak to that point.
Yeah, some of these questions are kind of like a devil's advocate, like we're getting questions from the members, so this also goes to that. What protection do buyer's agents have if the buyer refuses to pay their agreed upon fee?
Connecticut's way ahead of the rest of the country in this regard. ECAR has in both its buyer agreement and listing agreement the statutory language for our brokers to put a lien on the property if we do not get our compensation. It's a pretty involved law, and there's a lot of deadlines and dates, so attorneys should be utilized, but we do have that ability.
And what if the seller is offering more, then what about what happens when the seller's offering more than what is written into a buyer's agreement?
Theoretically, you could go to your buyer and renegotiate your fee, asking them to allow you to have the excess. However, in so doing, you are essentially violating your fiduciary obligation of loyalty. We are supposed to put our clients' interests above our own. And if we're asking the buyer if we can keep more money, we're putting our interests first. It would be a better practice to put what you think you're worth into the buyer brokerage and then use that excess to enhance your client's offer to the seller.
That covered perfectly.
This next question is about how this applies to different types of property. So does the settlement provide for the offer of compensation for landlords and tenants, and then also for land listings in the MLS?
The settlement is based on residential real estate. So generally, you're not going to have any sort of changes to land purchases, even multifamilies potentially, commercial properties, or rentals. That doesn't change our normal everyday practices that we were already doing before, and requirements for state law will still obviously have to be followed in terms of buyer and seller agreements and working with your fellow agents on the other end.
With that in mind, the NAR settlement agreement says compensation cannot be on the MLS. So it doesn't really matter that the lawsuit did not affect commercial or rental properties. Compensation cannot be on the MLS. So it has been removed everywhere on all property types in the MLS.
And this is just a general question for Carl. Do you have any general advice for handling things that are not covered here today, or questions about the settlement?
I'm going to go back to my biggest hope first, which is be nice. You know, I really hope that everybody's nice out there. I know how tough it is out there. You got buyers pushing you, you got sellers pushing you, you got other agents pushing you, but I do my best to try and give what I would like to receive on the other end of the phone or the other end of the email, and just try and be nice to each other. Beyond that, though, in terms of help and things that can give you advice and help on these topics, there is facts.realtor, which I think we brought up already, facts.realtor, that is the NAR site. And if you go to the CTR site, there is an entire section based on settlement resources. We did a class, I don't know, about a month ago or so. I hope some of you were on it. It was a free class at CTR. We got it approved for CE, and it was entirely about the settlement, antitrust, and the way things have changed. So many of the resources from that class are up on the CTR website as well.
Great. And then we're going to open it up to general questions from the audience. So we do have a microphone here in the aisle if anyone wants to come up to ask the panel any questions. I think in kind of related to what Carl was saying, last week I was had the opportunity to go see John Stewart, who's at Holding & Son, and one of the things that stuck with me that he said was, don't give in to the pessimism, or don't feel like there's a lot of negative sentiments going around. How can you rise above that? How can you change your mindset? We just had this whole presentation on focus and mindset. How can you be part of that change, do good business, be kind to your agents, and just go along with this is what is now is happening. NAR is trying to protect us. How can we move forward?
I have a question, and any one of you guys can answer it, but can you talk about the settlement that NAR made for $418 million, and who does it cover, and when does it cover those people?
The initial settlement that was made covers nearly everybody in Connecticut. It covered all brokerages that did less than $2 billion in sales. We do have one in Connecticut that was not in that group. We have several that are represented in Connecticut, but Ravis is based in Connecticut, and they were not part of that group. So they're dealing with a whole host of other issues that we as Ravis agents are not dealing with at the moment. And what it covers us from is that specific suit, which is sellers saying that they didn't realize that they were paying a buyer's agent. So it covers us on that side. There is still more out there. There's very likely, there's already more cases, but there's likely to be more buyer side cases. And we're still not quite done with the Department of Justice overseeing the entire idea of cooperative compensation, which is offering compensation at all. So that's still something that's on the table at this point.
Is it fair to say that the settlement covers what has happened going backwards, not what may happen going forwards?
Right, the settlement covers 100% of the realtors, right, regardless of their brokerage was covered. So 100% of the realtors themselves are held from personal liability, right? There are some brokerages that have liability on their side that were above that $2 million mark. So it's everything in the past. So the slate was wiped clean. So your behavior today would dictate if someone comes after you afterwards, right? Which is why we're up here, what we're trying to do as much, and to give put as much information out there as to not to get into trouble, right? And right now, the magnifying glass is on, right? People who are looking for people to fail. So just make sure you're dotting your I's, you're crossing your T's, and you're working for your buyer, right? Everything is transparency. Right? Transparency is the name of the game when it comes to anything and everything in real estate these days. So just be as transparent with your buyer, your seller, and anyone else in the transaction, and you'll be good.
Great, and I know, Carl, there's a big event coming up that's CTR is putting on, that's free to everyone, October 17th at the Schubert Theater. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, we'd love to see all of you there. It's going to be a fantastic day. It's from 10 till about 2:30 in the afternoon, so it's going to be kind of a morning start, some coffees beforehand. We have Jared James coming in to speak. If you haven't seen him before, he is fantastic, kind of helping you to navigate the new market post-settlement. We also have Christine Hansen from NAR, who's the first vice president for NAR. And do you have my list right there? I forgot our third speaker. I'm forgetting.
Terry Watson.
Terry Watson, yes, who is the most fabulous motivational speaker you will ever see. It is free. You need to register before October 11th. Everything is covered. They're going to have a taste of New Haven at lunchtime. In between the speakers, there's going to be free parking. The whole kit and caboodle is all covered right there at the Schubert New Haven. So I hope to see you all there.
And giveaways.
And giveaways.
And another event coming up this year is the NAR NXT, which is in Boston this year. Do you want to talk a little bit about a national conference and what it's like to go to there?
Sure. I've been to many. So NXT is usually the November annual meeting conference for National Association of Realtors. This year we are lucky to have it right here in New England and Boston. There will be a tremendous number of realtors from all over the country who come in. There's classes, speakers, roundtables, all of the governance meetings, all of the committee meetings happen for NAR at these events. It is spectacular. If you have been reluctant to go because of having to travel somewhere far away to do one of these conferences, this is your chance to just a couple hours away, head up, check it, you do a day pass if you don't want to stay for the whole, 5-6 days. And it is eye-opening, amazing learning potential to be had, and a lot of fun too. And we're having a great CTR night out, which we are doing dinner at Legal Seafoods and then like a ghost and spirit tour around old Boston. So it'll be a fun time.
I had another question about the decoupling of compensation. Is there any update on DOJ, the settlement approval by the court? Are we going forward with where we are right now? And I asked that in relation to some resistance from some of our members who are not fully grasping the fact that our industry is changing before our eyes. So what does that mean today and possibly tomorrow?
Well, I know that NAR has been meeting with the Department of Justice. They have had meetings with them, and they've been deemed productive. So I don't know what the actual contents of those meetings were, because I'm sure they were not allowed to chat about that. But as we were talking about before, cooperative compensation, there has been a push from the Department of Justice that they really would like to decouple the commission structure so that buyers pay buyer agents and sellers pay seller agents. The problem with that now is that the commission cannot be built in on a mortgage without it affecting ratios. And so the seller is also not paying you from their pocket. It's not like they go into their bank account and cash a check to pay you at the end of the closing. They are taking it from proceeds of the deal. And it is allowed to be on their side of the transaction, which is how it has worked for however many years we've been doing this. My hope would be if there was ever a decoupling, that it would also be the banking regulations being changed so that buyers could pay. Because I have, as I've said before, I have no problem explaining to a buyer what I do and why I get paid. But I also don't want to leave them out in the lurch, especially those buyers who do not have the finances to be able to pay me out of their pocket if they can't finance it into their loan, if they're already getting closing cost credits to cover closing costs, or doing a CHFA type program where they're doing down payment assistance where that little extra budget is not built in. I don't want them to not be able to hire an agent. I want all people to be able to hire an agent regardless of whether they can pay out of their pocket or pay out of their mortgage or pay out of whatever, however they can figure it out. I think everybody deserves to be represented because it's a tough process, as we all know, to buy a house, and everybody deserves to have good representation.
Amy, a follow-up question on that one with regard to the changing landscape that we have, in particular on the listing agreement. You know that ECAR is changing their listing agreement to become more of an à la carte situation where you build up the ability to offer buyer-broker compensation, or if you're working unrepresented or dual agent. Not everybody who has forms is there. Can you share with this group what is out there in terms of listing agreements so that everybody is aware of this shifting landscape and it's all not all happening at one time with each forms provider?
What do you mean, what is out there for listing agreements?
Just CTR has a listing agreement with something different. Some of the big brokerages have. Can you share the difference between what they are and what ECAR is trying to accomplish?
All right. We have listing agreements out there that are ultra conservative. They've done everything they can to ensure that agents are completely decoupling their fees. Everything is completely itemized. They are making the forms very similar to California, which, if you've been following the news, California had to decouple everything. And then we have some of the other associations which have done nothing. Their forms have not changed at all. So we have the full gamut in between. What we are trying to do with the Forms Committee is to provide our membership with a platform to walk the seller through all the fees that are part of the transaction, so there is full transparency. The reason we've been nailed, and a good portion, is a lack of transparency about fees. And we're trying to create this tool for the members so they don't have to worry about this in any future lawsuits. Because remember, we're only protected against what has happened. National Association of Realtors isn't going to bail any of us out again if we mess up. So we're trying to protect our members from doing just that.
Any other questions? Got a question out there?
So I've run into some listing agents that say that they can't show their property to somebody without having a buyer representation signed. I would think that if that were the case, then we couldn't do open houses, but it's under my understanding that we need to disclose who we're representing and we can show our own listings. Is that correct?
Per the rules, a listing agent can't ask for your buyer agreement. So if if I'm your buyer and you're my agent and we want to go see somebody else's house, that agent can't ask to see your agreement. They can't ask if you have an agreement, are you representing this buyer? But they are not privy to those terms because they are not part of that contract. What was the second half you were asking?
That was
houses.
my question.
That was it, okay.
No, that was not my question.
That was not my question.
So the listing agent has a listing and Joe Smith calls and says, can I see your listing on Thursday?
Sure.
And can the listing agent show it to Joe Smith without having a buyer representation signed?
There's two answers to that question. The first one is whatever your broker says first. If your broker allows you to do that, yes, they probably will, of course. And you are allowed to show them without a buyer agreement. But you are not allowed to show them without prospective parties and without agency disclosure. You do need to remind them. It's sort of like the idea of when you walk into a car dealership, you know that the guy who's trying to sell you the car makes money selling the car and has a vested interest in selling you that car. So you need to tell the buyer, hey, just so you know, I represent the seller. There is a possibility that I could represent you as well if your brokerage offers that service, or I could get someone else from my brokerage, or you could get your own agent, whatever it may be. And it's just required that you disclose those options to the buyer.
Thank you.
So does that have to be in writing, or can that just be verbal? I mean, my understanding can be verbal, but I know a lot of agencies might push the idea of putting it in writing to protect themselves. But technically, what's the rule, writing or verbal?
For which one?
Agency disclosure.
There are forms for all of that.
But what is technically the law?
The law is you for an agency disclosure for prospective parties, the minute you are talking about anything more than if you're showing them a house, you should give them the prospective parties form.
Do they have to sign it? By law? Not what you think.
There is
by
no law
Okay.
that they have to, there is several of those forms have signature spots. And the way that I have answered that is when there are people who say, I'm not signing anything, you hold the paper up, you hold your phone up, you snap a pic of them, and you say, I'm giving them the form. And then when they say, what do you take a picture of me for? You say, well, you're not going to sign it, so I'm giving you the form, but now I have proof in case you say I didn't give you the form.
Right, but once again, that's to cover the aspect, the law doesn't say it has to sign it.
Yes.
That's the best way I've ever heard of having that.
You like that?
We were taught to just write, refuse to sign and write their name, but that's an even better way to put it. You got another question?
It's not a question, it's a comment. Carl, most of people don't know what the prospective buyer form is. How many people know what that is?
Look at that.
Okay, well,
We
that's
got
pretty good.
well-trained members here.
But there are several who don't know what it is, and it does not require the buyer's signature, like Carl said.
Nope, I did not say anything was required.
Like you said, it's not required.
Yes.
Oh, we have a question up here. See?
I just wanted to make a comment that another way to do it is you can email the prospective parties form, and now you have a documentation of when you did that prior to the appointment.
Given that most of our contact is via email for listings, that is a great way to do it as well. I was gonna say one thing. When you said, can you give us some scripts? Scripts are what got people in trouble in the first place. You need to do it however you want to do it. The things that you need to communicate, not in a script,
Okay, that's what I
are
meant.
your value, that you don't work for free, nor does your buyer, that you will earn your pay, and that you will work diligently to try and get that compensation any way besides them before coming to them for it. I do think that explaining, I was just, the condo I was saying, I was showing off front. I had told my buyer when he first started looking, I said, I will tell you, any of the units that you're interested in, I will tell you what they're offering up front, so that you know whether or not you want to proceed with it, or if you want to proceed with it and ask them to pay, or if you're willing to pay, depending on what the price is. I feel like most people, if you boil it down and you say bottom line on things, that's what they're concerned with. It's not that they don't want to pay you, it's that they want to know what their bottom line is. Sellers, buyers, both of them. They just want to know, what am I gonna have to put up, or what am I gonna end up with? And when you cover all of those pieces, usually they stay pretty calm and they understand, you're gonna do everything you can to help them.
Okay, I'm gonna try this one more time, because that's all great information, but it's not exactly what I meant.
Microphone.
Sorry, I was trying to talk loud.
Remember, I'm deaf, Carol.
Okay, so you talk to your buyer, you do the buyer broker, the buyer says to you, or you know that they don't have, whatever your compensation amount, they don't have that by the time they pay their closing costs, whatever. So you're gonna very aggressively try to get compensation elsewhere. And then you run into one of these companies that has a listing, and the listing company has made it their policy that they're not offering compensation. How do we explain that to our prospective buyer when they're going to immediately, and I've heard it from a lot of agents in the last month, say, my client doesn't want me to show them that house because they know they can't afford to pay me. So that's what I want to know is like, how would you answer that question or respond to it?
I think at the end of the day, we just take our direction from our buyer. And the broker-to-broker agreement on compensation leaves options for a brokerage to pay or a seller to pay. So if the brokerage is saying flatly, I don't believe any of them have said they won't pay. I believe that none of them are building it in on their agreements. If they have said that, you can still ask them, and you can still ask the seller. You are still allowed to do that. It's just, we've all been living in the post-COVID market, maybe it's slowing down a little bit, but where you see a house that's on for $359, and your buyer says, let's go for it, offer them $360. And you're like, good luck, that house is selling for $410. And they're like, offer them $360. And you're like, it's gonna sell for $410. And then they say, write up the offer at $360. You say, okay, you're the boss. Write up the offer, and then they don't get the house. And I'm like, why didn't you get the house? Because it sold for $410. All we can do is explain it as best we can and hope that eventually it hits it.
And then there's also situations, so I had a client this week, they were looking at a house, they're like, we can only offer list. I'm like, well, who knows if they'll get it? Let's put the offer in anyways. It was accepted. It's shocking what will get accepted in this market. Even if the house is perfect, you think it's gonna go way over, sometimes the offers just aren't there.
We also have the ability to write it in as a term of the contract. Seller to pay buyer brokerage to neutralize buyer brokerage agreement. We can do that. So, and come on, we've been negotiating terms for forever. This is just one more term on the contract that we're gonna have to negotiate. Now, it's not furniture or a John Deere tractor, it's compensation. That's all. We just have to get comfortable with negotiating one more thing and recognize that that's just not how business is going to be.
A question on our purchase and sales agreement. Exactly 1 month ago, we published changes to our purchase and sales agreement and included in section 6 the compensation. And I have had a little bit of feedback on that it's a little bit confusing, and the gist of it is that agents that have come to our membership meetings or are here today that are in the know, understand the contract, are fine with it, but a vast majority of agents have no idea. Some don't even know there's a settlement happening. So if you can just review that section in our purchase and sale agreement with those options, I'm sure you can remember what they are.
Boy.
You're memorized, right?
I don't know them verbatim, but what basically our purchase and sale contract has done has eliminated the need for our membership to write legal language. We're simply checking the box as to how and if compensation to the buyer will come out of the transaction. Good answer.
You want to go through the actual?
Yell at me.
So first, thank you for that new form, because I think it's awesome. I think it untangles this so-called squirrely dilemma, and I boiled it down for me, if this is helpful to anyone, that what we've essentially done is we've taken a field that was only visible to brokers and agents, and we've put it up front on the contract with the rest of the money. And then the other aspect I wanted to point out is, it doesn't really matter to me what compensation is being offered in a listing if I'm working with a buyer. If I'm working with a buyer who's instructed me to get it through their offer because they don't have the funds or they don't want to pay it out of pocket, then I'm just going to use our wonderful e-car form. I'm going to put in what I want, that I have an agreement with my buyer in that line that says the seller will pay. And then that's up to the listing agent to present, just like it would be if they were paying closing costs or some other cost of that offer. There's a bottom line that as listing agents, we always have to tell our seller so they know exactly what that offer's worth. And if they have 5 offers, they're going to know what the bottom line of each of those offers is worth. So I just think we're taking it out of the hidden field that only brokers and agents can see, and we put it up front for full transparency on the front of the contract. End of story.
Drop the mic.
I don't want to break it.
Any other questions? No one has anything else? Well, thank you guys so much for being with us today. Let's give the panel a round of applause.
Movavi.